All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third Ask Me Anything Recycling Edition event put on by the Northeast Resource Recovery Association. My name is Andrea Folsom. I am the Communications Coordinator and will be your host today. I am joined with a panel of wonderful recycling experts who will go ahead and introduce themselves. First up, we have Reagan.
Hi, I'm Reagan Bissonnette. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Resource Recovery Association. And for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, we are a unique nonprofit that helps communities manage their own recycling programs. We have over 450 members throughout New England, and the vast majority of those are towns and cities that work with us to improve recycling and make recycling financially and environmentally strong. So look forward to talking with you all today.
Great. Next up, we have Bonnie with us.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Bethune, and I am the Senior Member Services Representative at NRRA. I kind of like the senior because I've been doing this work for almost 40 years, having operated Wilton Recycling Center, New Boston Recycling Center, and at NRRA for the last 19 years. Love being on this side of the phone and working with members to market their valuable materials. Happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. And finally, we have Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Whipple, the Town of Swanzey Recycling Manager. I've been the manager for 5 years now, and I've been here 11 years total. And I really like the recycling field because it gives an opportunity to make a change and improve on your town and the recycling efforts for it. And I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you three so much for joining us. We already had a whole bunch of questions sent in. And if folks think of questions as they're listening to this event today, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we will respond to them throughout the event. So I'm going to go ahead and talk just a little bit about our Recycle Right program. So this event, like I said, is our third AMA event. This is our second digital event, and we had one live event at our annual conference this year. So our Recycle Right campaign is a campaign that we started actually way back in April. The purpose of the campaign was to create an evergreen Recycle Right campaign, meaning that you will get to use this now and well into the future. So we're going to have information that remains accessible, correct, factual for a long time. The purpose of our campaign is to encourage residents to recycle more and to recycle better. So no longer trying to decrease stuff like contamination or wish cycling, and help increase things like starting or maintaining a recycling habit or encouraging others to recycle. There are a bunch of components of our Recycle Right campaign. If you have gone on to our Facebook or Instagram in the past several months, you will see many social media posts that we're sharing nearly daily. We have videos, a dedicated newsletter, as well as a brand new section on our website that's dedicated solely to Recycle Right. You can find all of the images there that you're welcome to download and share, including all of our text copy as well, which again is all designed to be downloaded, shared in emails on websites, however you see fit. This is just a little shot of our Instagram and Facebook where you can find and join us. I'd encourage you to follow along so that you can get all of this great recycling education and information. And then this work is funded by a USDA grant that we really appreciate so that we can do this great work in helping to educate communities and municipalities across New Hampshire. And here again is where you'll find our Recycle Right section on our website. So that was my little blurb, and I know that's not what people signed up for. So we are going to dive right into the questions. We're going to start with the basics, and I'm going to start sending this first one to Bonnie, which is, what is recycling contamination and what are likely sources of contamination from things like schools or businesses?
That's a big question, recycling contamination, because we've heard everything from 10% contaminated to 30% contaminated. So it's discourages us a little bit from putting our recyclables out on the curb or at a recycling center. But a lot of what happens at schools and businesses, as well as recycling facilities, is what we term wish cycling. So we want to recycle it so badly that we're going to put it in the bin because, well, it looks like plastic, but it's really a rubber hose. So that wish recycling can get us into a bit of trouble. So it's, if you think about a school or a business, typically they have a cardboard bin, and wanting to put things in there that are not corrugated cardboard with that little wavy line can cause some troubles down the road when that material goes to the mill. So important to understand what should go in that bin, you know, talking to your vendor, see what they really want in there. Schools also have a lot of aseptic packaging, milk jugs, juice cartons. Very important to understand, is that acceptable with a mixed paper or not? So a lot of it comes to just asking questions and then letting people know the answers.
That's great. So we're definitely starting off with our big hard questions right up front. Our next big question goes to Reagan, which is, how can recycling be made easier?
Yeah, we could have probably an entire hour-long conversation about how to make recycling easier, but one of the first things I always suggest to people is to make sure that if you have any questions about how to recycle in your community, please reach out to the staff in your community who handle your recycling. So, I mean, in this case, you know, Josh is the person who has all the answers for people in his community. So that's one thing you can do to make recycling easier for you, is just to become familiar with what is accepted in your community's recycling stream. And that can vary by community. I think we'll talk a bit more about why that's the case, but really understanding who is it in your community that you can ask your questions to. And that's a great way to better understand how to make recycling work well in your community.
Excellent. So Josh, Reagan just mentioned your name as the person with all the answers for your community. So in both in Swanzey, but kind of everywhere, what mistakes do people make when they're recycling that actually results in materials just being trashed?
Even something as simple as dirty or food contaminated can really put a plug into the recycling stream over here. And the most important thing, I think, is being able to catch it and educate residents before they even get to that point. And even just something as simple as signage and designated areas where people can ask questions or figure that kind of stuff out is, I found, to be the most helpful.
That's excellent. Bonnie, another question that we got was residents wondering why perhaps their town stopped recycling.
This has happened to quite a number of towns. Back a couple years ago, let's talk about mixed paper for a while. The mixed paper actually was either at no revenue to the town for all of the work to separate it, or at cost. And the cost got so high that the town had to make that hard decision to landfill or continue recycling. And some did opt to say, no longer going to do mixed paper until the market improves. And it's not only mixed paper, some single stream programs were stopped because it got almost as high as throwing it away as trash. So again, they had to make that hard decision until those markets rebound. I would encourage any community that is not recycling either one product or a few, get in touch with NRRA. We'll look at the current markets and options and help make a decision together. We just started mixed paper over in a Western town this week again. So it's encouraging, even if the prices aren't so great.
That's excellent. And we'll talk, I know, a little bit more about recycling markets later in this event. So Reagan, where does trash go when it's thrown away in New Hampshire?
So in New Hampshire, we have 6 landfills and 1 incinerator. And those are the most common destinations for most of the trash that's disposed of in New Hampshire. And with respect to our landfills, 3 of those landfills are what we call limited service area landfills. They can only accept trash from a very specifically defined area. So for example, the city of Lebanon, New Hampshire has its own landfill, and they can only accept trash from communities, about 24 communities that actually are in New Hampshire and Vermont. And then 3 of our landfills in New Hampshire are what are called unlimited service area, which means that they can take trash from anywhere, from inside New Hampshire, from outside New Hampshire. And then, as I mentioned, we have 1 incinerator as well. And I think one number that really surprises people, that surprised me the first time I heard it, was that when you look at all of the trash that is disposed of in New Hampshire, about half of that came from out of state. So, you know, half of that trash is coming from New Hampshire, but then we're also accepting and receiving trash from other states. I will say that not all trash in New Hampshire is necessarily disposed of in our state. For example, if you live in a community that's maybe a border community with another state, it is possible that your trash is then going over to crossing the border and going to another state.
I did not know that. That's great. I'm learning things as well. So when it comes to recycling, Josh, do you have any suggestions for residents who want to help expand recycling in their towns?
I think the best thing that residents can do to help expand the recycling program in their town is to get more involved, do the research, volunteer, anything they know that might be helpful or helping out a fellow resident to bring their recycling or expand on what we could recycle. And that's the beauty of the recycling industry, is you can open it up to different revenue streams, or eliminating things out of the compactor, waste streams, stuff like that, that could be recycled and maybe even generate some revenue.
That's great. So another question that we had sent in was, how do we help promote recycling, especially with folks who might be reluctant to do so? So I'm going to go ahead and take that question because that's a large part of what I do. I always like to start this answer off with saying that the reasons that you may choose to recycle might be totally different from the reasons another person chooses to recycle. And it doesn't make them better or worse, they're just different. I always encourage people to lead with kindness and understanding, and not with shame. There's a term known as eco-shaming, where you really shame people for their choices and how they affect the environment. This has actually been shown to be not just unhelpful, but actually damaging to recycling. So I always start off with be kind and don't shame people. So the 2 reasons why people may choose to recycle is the environmental reason, removing waste from landfills, trying to close the loop, trying to make sure that materials are able to be used time and again. But there's also an economic and financial reason. We'll talk a little bit more today, but recycling can bring in revenue for towns, and it can help towns avoid costs. And so many people choose to recycle because financially it makes a lot of sense for their town, because that's all revenue coming back to their town. So I think whenever you're talking to someone about recycling, I would say start simple, start small, and set yourself up for success. You don't have to recycle everything all at once. Choose a reason why you recycle, or just do it because your friends are doing it. That's fine too. I really don't care why you choose to recycle, really, as long as you are recycling. And then the NRRA has a whole bunch of information on recycling, on how to recycle. We have a whole component on how to start or maintain a recycling habit. It's part of the Recycle Right campaign. It's free to share with whomever you would like. But also know that it might not just be one conversation, it may be many conversations, and that's okay too. Consistency is always going to be better than perfection. So just recycling a little bit whenever you can is going to be better than recycling once perfectly. So those would be my suggestions. All right. So now we're going to change pace a little bit, and we're going to talk boxes with Bonnie. We received a lot of questions about boxes, and Bonnie's going to get a whole bunch of them. So Bonnie, how are thin cardboard boxes recycled? Are they cardboard? Are they paper? This is like cereal boxes or cracker boxes.
Okay, in our industry, we have a lot of words that mean the same thing. So when we say cardboard, we may think of corrugated cardboard, like all of our Amazon boxes, or we may think of a cereal box, which is still called cardboard. So if you're looking at recycling, you want to separate those 2 things. And cardboard boxes, corrugated cardboard, would go to make new corrugated boxes, or the liners in cereal boxes. There's 7 layers in a cereal box, and they need the material from mixed paper or cereal boxes to make those interior liners. You've got the one they coat with the pretty colors and all of the ones in between. So all of those recycled fibers get captured and made into new boxes or cardboard boxes, corrugated cardboard boxes, or cereal boxes. So yeah.
Ooh, excellent. So you talked a little bit about cereal boxes. So those ones we obviously store not in the fridge or freezer. We know that oftentimes boxes that hold frozen food are either not recyclable or not as processable. You can't process them as easily when you recycle them. What about things that are held in the fridge, like butter boxes, cookie boxes, anything you keep in your refrigerator? Are those recyclable?
That may be one of the biggest questions we get and the most confusing, because a lot of curbside programs allow that material in. Yet when we talk to our communities, we say, please keep that out of the mixed paper. And the reason is it just does not break down well. When you think of a frozen food box, a frozen pizza box, even a soda or beer carton that can go in the refrigerator, it has to hold up in that environment. So they call it wet strength. That's one of the words to remember of the day, wet strength. And when we send a load of material to the market, we're sending pictures of that baled material, and they do not want to see a lot of beer cartons, soda cartons, frozen food boxes, because they know that when they get it to the mill, it's not going to break down as easily as the other material that does not have that plastic coating. Some of us remember our milk cartons from school days that actually had a wax coating on it. That is no longer the case. It's a very light plastic film. One of our communities in Rumney, New Hampshire, our operator said, okay, I need to explain to people what wet strength is. What's the difference? Why am I telling them not to put frozen food boxes into the mixed paper? So we took 2 things of water, put a regular cereal box in one, a frozen food box in the other, and it took a couple of weeks for that frozen food box to break down. The other one broke down really quickly. So we gave them a visual. This is why, and this makes the mixed paper more valuable on the other end without that commodity. Tough one. It's a tough question, but something to think about next time you recycle mixed paper. Again, what Reagan said, ask your community what's accepted at your facility so that you're not doing extra work for no reason.
Excellent. So I think that answers most of our box questions, actually. You tied a whole bunch into several questions that were asked. So we're going to talk a little bit about a really big topic that we hear a lot of, which is plastic. I think this is maybe where most of the questions end up coming from. So Reagan, can you talk to us just a little bit about types of plastic and styrofoam?
Yes, there is so much to say about plastic. Just to start about just the types of plastic. So there's a lot of types of plastic. There's basically 7 types of plastic that we think about. So one is what we call number 1 plastic, also known as PET. It's short for polyethylene terephthalate. And that is what you would think about as sort of your clear water bottle, plastic water bottle. And that has, there's good markets for recycling that material. The second type of plastic, we call it number 2 plastic, which is, we refer to as HDPE, that's high density polyethylene. And when we think about recycling markets, there's really 2 different versions of that. There is HDPE natural, which is basically, it has no color to it. So think about maybe a apple cider jug or a milk carton that isn't colored. And then we also have recycling markets for what we would call HDPE colored. So that's just sort of any number 2 plastic that has pigment in it. So for that, you might think of like a Tide laundry bottle, detergent bottle. And then we've got number 3 plastic, which is PVC or vinyl, polyvinyl chloride. That's not something we see commonly in residential recycling. So that's just not something we see a lot of coming through our facilities for residential recycling programs. But then you've got number 4, which is LDPE, that stands for low density polyethylene. And that's basically your stretchy plastic film. So we typically don't want to see that coming through recycling programs. That's actually a major bane of any single stream recycling programs, because that type of stretchy film plastic, like your bread bags or your Ziploc bags, it can really tangle up machinery. So the best thing to do with those is really to take it back to a retailer like a grocery store that accepts them. And then we've got number 5, plastic, polypropylene, and that is most commonly in plastic that's used in your yogurt containers. It's sort of a lighter weight plastic that is very common in that type of product. And then we've got number 6, plastic, which is our polystyrene. You also may know it as styrofoam. That is typically not accepted in either your curbside recycling programs or even your drop-off recycling programs. But what I can share is that actually the town of Guilford, New Hampshire, is working on a pilot project right now to accept styrofoam. And they have purchased a machine that is going to allow them to sort of melt and compact that material and then hopefully actually get it to a recycling market. But typically you're not going to see styrofoam being recyclable in your programs. And then the last one is number 7, plastic. And that is simply a catch-all. It is just talking about any old sort of mix of multiple plastics together, or maybe it's just sort of mystery plastic. But it just is sort of a catch-all. And so again, we don't see a lot of number 7 plastics coming through when we're talking about residential recycling.
That's excellent. So that's a big plastics. Now, little question, Josh, what about the plastic inside of cracker boxes? Can that be recycled?
Unfortunately, no, that would probably be considered trash. And even if you could, the volume you need to have to recycle it would be outrageous.
Yeah, so those just get pitched. I know that stretchy plastic, like plastic bags, can be recycled. You can often find those recycling drop-off boxes at like your grocery store or big box stores for any of those single-use plastic bags, and that gets turned into plastic lumber, which is often used on outdoor furniture, which is great. So a question for you, Reagan. Once, and this was, I'm going to read the question how it was sent into us, and then you can kind of expand on it a little bit more. So once a refundable item leaves a recycling center, such as a 5-cent plastic bottle, where do they go and what are they used for? And in addition to that question, why doesn't New Hampshire have a deposit for cans and bottles?
Right. So, for example, Vermont does have a deposit for certain materials. And so if you're in Vermont and you've got that plastic bottle that can be redeemed, you take it to a redemption center and they'll give you your 5 cents. And from there, those materials are typically going straight to a company that's going to turn them into new products. So if it's plastic, it will be sent to a plastic recycling company. If it's glass, it'll be sent to a glass recycling company. And what I will say is that particularly for glass, having a redemption program is actually quite useful for increasing glass recycling. And that's because one of the challenges we have with glass is that, of course, it can break. And so if you are in a community that has curbside recycling and you're throwing your glass bottles in, by the time those glass bottles are getting to a facility that's going to separate them out, they break and there's often a lot of trash associated with them. And so it's harder to recycle them because there's more impurities in there. But with states that have a redemption program for glass, that they know that they're receiving a very pure supply of glass, and that glass can be much more easily recycled. And so that's one of the benefits of having these redemption programs. New Hampshire does not have one. And actually, a bottle deposit legislation has been introduced and proposed, I believe, dozens of times in the past decades. And here in New Hampshire, anything that might sound like it might be a tax is often met with a lot of skepticism. So we just, at this point, there hasn't been the political will to pass legislation like that in New Hampshire.
Interesting. No, that's really helpful. So I know when it comes to, Reagan just described a whole bunch of different plastics and what happens to plastic bottles, which tend to be number ones. What about number fives, Bonnie? I know that oftentimes people are kind of wandering around with their number five plastic, especially if you have a source separated community, wondering what you can do with it if you don't want to throw it away. What should folks do?
Okay, so back to what Reagan said, number fives are typically your butter containers, your Cool Whip containers, yogurt are huge. And it is a frequent question that we get about my number fives. It is getting captured by our members in their single stream program, because typically a single stream program is a 1 through 7 mix. It's getting captured in a commingled loose program, which again is typically has 1 through 7 plastics. It's getting captured in a baled program where communities put 1 through 7 plastics all in one bale. And that's a good portion. We have 37% of our people who do baled plastics, it's 1 through 7. So those fives are getting captured. It's the third most valuable plastic in our mix after number 2 HDPE and number 1 PET. Number fives is the next up and coming plastics to capture. We have 2 communities right now in the western part of the state that are separating out number fives and baling them, and most likely we'll just do a tractor trailer load with both of those towns and pick up the 2 together. So yes, number fives can be recycled. Encourage your community to think about potentially pulling those aside. Again, you've got to have, like Josh mentioned, you've got to have the quantity of them to be able to store them, bale them, store the bales, get them to market. But there are markets for that material.
Excellent. So this question's for Reagan, but it's really for all 3 of you. When we're talking about plastics, what plastics are truly recyclable and which are not, especially when it comes to a single stream system?
So to start with, my first answer is always check with your own community, because every community might be a little bit different, but there are certain types of plastics that are commonly not accepted in single stream recycling. So we talked before about number 4 HDPE, so your film plastic. There may be 1 or 2 examples in the entire country, but as a general rule, you are not to include any film plastic, like plastic bags, in your single stream recycling, because not because they can't be recycled, but because when that single stream, you know, all your recyclables put together, when it gets to the facility, it's going to separate out the material. Those film plastics are going to gum up the machinery, which means if they have to stop working, workers have to get in there with knives or box cutters and cut stuff out of machinery. It's really dangerous, actually. So yes, that film is recyclable, but you don't want to put it in your single stream system. Another example might be clamshell packaging. So it's a number 1 plastic, and we know that number 1 plastic water bottles, they're highly recyclable. But when you look at clamshell packaging, the type of thing, you know, like those big containers that you might get a salad in, or you might have a head of lettuce in it. A lot of food is coming in those now. They can be recycled, and some single stream communities do accept them, but not all. They, even though they are the same type of plastic, they're actually created in a different way. And so they actually sort of melt at a different melting point. And they just have to be treated separately when they're recycled. So not every single stream program is going to be recycling those types of plastics. And there's always mystery plastics, right? So if you have some plastic item that's not even a container, they're often not going to be recyclable. Small items, small types of plastics that can fall through machinery, they're often not going to be recyclable. So for example, we get asked about pill containers. You know, I know that we've talked with our vendors, right, Bonnie, and they typically are not wanting to get little pill containers. in the recycling because they're so small and it makes it hard to recycle them. So Bonnie, Josh, if you have anything else to add, there's no end to the things we can talk about related to plastic recycling.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed that one. And again, just to reiterate what you said, just check with your facility in your town and see what they have for specifics on plastics, and educate yourself as much as you can on it.
And another thing to remember is that 1 through 7 is a voluntary system. It's really not based on anybody saying a number 1 PET has to be this, or number 7 could most likely be a lot of HDPE. But if it's an orange juice container, it has a layer in there that has a vinyl in it. So they have to say, it's not this, it's this, just to kind of give some number to it. Another thing we've been hearing a lot about is recyclable packaging that is the foam with the layer of almost like a brown paper bag on it. And it's got either plastic foam packaging in it, or it's got those cellulose type of things. It says recyclable on it as number 2. So I get the question. It's not a container, so it typically shouldn't go in either the mixed paper or in with the plastics. So it's one of those things that companies say, yep, it's recyclable, but it typically is not. So again, one thing we talked about earlier before we came on was black plastic. Typically in the 1 through 7 mix, particularly, the black plastic blends in with a conveyor belt in their system. So it gets lost in the shuffle and does not get recycled. So we encourage those 1 through 7 markets to not do the black plastic at all. So yeah, you want it captured, you want your work, you want your rinsing out to end up being reused. So again, back to what can your community recycle, and encourage operators to give us a shout, when there is a question, because if Josh has a question, another operator probably has that same question, and we can relay it back in a bigger picture, because new stuff's coming on the market all of the time.
Absolutely.
That's great. So another question that was just sent in to us a few minutes ago, and it really relates to this conversation about plastics, is how can we simplify the understanding of which plastics are actually recyclable or going to be repurposed? I know I've heard of, jugs and bottles. If it's a jug or a bottle, most likely it can be recycled. Is there any other way for folks to kind of have a cheat sheet or a quick reference on what really, I know that this thing most likely can be recycled and it's plastic?
Something we've done here is we've actually stapled examples of number 1s and number 2s, the different grades above the sorting windows. So residents can kind of get a look at what they're looking for and which window to put it in, and the designated number on the bottom of them.
The opposite side I've heard of that is the wall of shame at a recycling center, where they put up things that aren't recyclable.
Yeah,
but I think both have their value in that we want to encourage people to buy the things that can be recycled at their facility. So we have a lot of power in our hands as a consumer, because we don't have to, if we don't have to buy those clamshells because we know we can't put them in our recyclables, then that's very important to understand.
And then I'll take this upstream and point out that one of the challenges we run into with recycling is we're just handling items at the end of the line. So plastic packaging in particular keeps evolving and changing. I mean, it is where the source of so many questions come from. And we in the recycling industry aren't really in a position to influence the development of the new packaging. And that's where legislation can come in. Some states have adopted basically legislation that helps encourage manufacturers to develop packaging that can be recycled or easily recycled. I know that you'll see on some food packaging, they'll have the how to recycle label on it, where they're trying to make it more clear that, for example, the outside sleeve of your crackers can be recycled with your mixed paper, but the crinkly interior plastic liner needs to be thrown away. And so I think also just really clear signage is very helpful. And I'll add here that one of the challenges we have is that the number of the plastic, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 that's inside those little chasing arrows, that does not tell you that something is recyclable or not. That is just a clue as to what type of plastic it is, but it doesn't automatically mean you can recycle it. And I think there's a lot of confusion around that in the public, understandably.
We're also starting to see a lot of communities have on their websites question and answer. Where do I take plant pots? And if the facility itself cannot take it, it'll tell various places in that community that you can take them. So I think we're going to see much more of that in the future.
That's great. I love the walls idea, both the wall of shame and the wall of things to throw here. So those are great. When we're talking about, I know I mentioned a little bit about plastic bag recycling, and I'm going to send this one to Bonnie actually, because you've talked about plastic bag recycling in the past. What about like thin styrofoam sheets? Do those count as plastic bags for plastic? I don't know how stretchy they are, I guess.
And that's the trick. We've been talking with Trex quite a bit that makes the plastic lumber out of the plastic bags that you and I bring to Hannaford's or Shaw's or Market Basket. The rule of thumb is what the Trex representative said. If you can push your thumb through and it starts to stretch, then that's okay to put in with the plastic bags. So don't only think of grocery bags, think of your bread bags, think of your dry cleaning bags. Do not think of your foam packaging that you probably can't stretch, because that's a very different material. The low density polyethylene, as Reagan mentioned, actually plastic bags are marked HDPE and LDPE just to help us along in our confusion. But again, if it stretches, keep it clean, keep it dry, put it into your bring it back to your grocery store. It will get brought back to the distribution center and back to companies like Trex.
Excellent. All right, so that was a lot about plastic. We're now going to turn towards some kitchen woes. We had a lot of questions about things related to the kitchen, and Josh gets to answer a whole bunch of these. So let's start right off. Where can I recycle water filters, like from a Brita?
Depends on obviously the facility in your town. And to start off, maybe check with the manufacturer first if the recycling center is not an option. And then from there, if it's not recyclable, then the facility itself can make the decision whether they have a place to put it for recyclable or whether to put it with the trash.
All right. So again, asking, key. How about old kitchen utensils? Should we recycle them or trash them?
Right off the bat, something with that, I'd say, is there somebody you know that could use them? Can you donate them to a kitchen around the town? Local events, people can use them. Worst comes to worst, they would probably go in with the trash.
That makes sense. How about batteries, household batteries? Can I just chuck those in the trash?
So what we do here is we don't let any batteries go into the trash. We have a couple bins off to the side to separate out the different batteries, and then trained facility operator will go through, separate them out, whether they go in with the rechargeable batteries, lithium batteries, down the line that way, and then that way there's no mistakes or any chance to cause a fire in the compactor or at the landfill when it gets there.
Yeah, I think that's something that folks don't necessarily realize, is that those batteries, especially lithium batteries, can catch on fire really easily.
And I believe it's prior to 1997 was the mercury containing batteries. So that's another hazard right there.
And if you have batteries that were made prior to 1997, it's very exciting. How about compost? So can you compost? This is a great question. Can I compost coffee and vegetable food scraps in my woods and meadows?
That's kind of a tricky one. Depends if you want that kind of stuff sitting around. It may take a little longer. You might encourage pests to come through. And then I guess it would depend on your property and whether you have a fenced-in area for it or not.
All right. And hopefully we'll be seeing more composting throughout New Hampshire because I know that the regulations for composting have recently been updated. So staying with composting, what about, this is an interesting question, what are the impacts of recycling compostable or biodegradable cups?
Recycling them or composting them?
Well, the question says recycling, so I'm going to go ahead and assume you cannot recycle compostable cups, but I don't know. I guess that's the question for you guys.
I'd consider that contamination in the recycling stream of it. And again, that can cause some issues in a compost pile also with breaking down and just several different issues of not having the time or space to be able to keep the pile moving enough to be able to break it down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Or encourage other stuff that's not compostable to go in there with it. So overall, I wouldn't suggest it.
Yeah, no, and we had another question about talking about composting, you know, sort of the compostable single-use cups and cutlery. And we actually recently did a Recycle Right campaign post on this. So any cups, single-use cups or cutlery that are known as either recyclable or compostable, they mean commercial composting. So that's not at-home composting. You can't just throw that into your compost pile because it will just stay as it is. It's not going to break down. So unless you have access to a commercial composting organization that you can bring it to, compostable really just ends up being more of a marketing ploy and less of a way to actually remove garbage from the solid waste stream, because those compostable cups and recyclable cups generally end up as trash. So that takes us through talking kitchen stuff. And this is great. We're doing wonderful. We have 15 more minutes. So another big topic when it comes to recycling is money. There's a lot of kind of misinformation or misunderstanding around how money plays a role in recycling, either how much it costs, how much you make. So we're going to break that down a little bit. So Bonnie, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about recycling markets, what they are, and if it costs money to recycle, or if towns make money. I know it's kind of a two-part question for you.
Okay, so there are markets for recyclables, and yes, it does cost to recycle at a facility. You've got to have staff, you've got to have, I love the term that Josh used, trained operators, and they need to know what's acceptable, how to handle what comes in. So there are costs to that, but typically the cost to recycle is less than it is to throw that material away. Let's look at waste. Typically about $100 a ton to take it to a landfill, take it to an incinerator. Let's just use that as an example. Cardboard right now is worth, if it's baled, it's worth $140 a ton revenue. So there's our question. Do we recycle it and get the $140 a ton, or do we throw it away and pay $100 a ton? Typically residents can understand that swing because it's a big one. So you're not only getting your $140 a ton, you're saving $100 a ton. So the value of that cardboard all of a sudden becomes $240 a ton. So looking at the cost avoidance of that material by putting in one bin versus another. But once you get that cardboard, you've got to process it. You've either got to put it into a special container, loose, or you've got to put it into a baler. And that takes time, that takes energy, that takes a very good piece of equipment and the knowledge to use it. And you've got to store that material. So that's where the costs come in. So it's about the environment. It's about keeping that material out of our precious landfill space, particularly in New Hampshire. And it's getting that second chance for that material to be used again. So all of those factors come into play as far as do I recycle or do I not? And I think the majority of the people want to recycle very much. And that's how we keep these markets strong in getting the material to the mills to be made into new product. So hopefully that answered the question.
No, that's great. So building off of that, Reagan, why do we see recycling markets changing then?
So when we talk about recycling markets, we're just talking about the value of the individual recyclable commodities. And these things change based on supply and demand. So for example, historically, for a long time, the most valuable item in your recycling bin by weight has typically been the aluminum can. And that is because it is very expensive to extract more aluminum ore out of the earth. And so actually there are estimates that something like over 70% of all the aluminum that's ever been created is still in use. Basically, it gets recycled, it gets reused, it really can be recycled indefinitely. Now, on the other hand, we have seen things like plastics have had sort of more variable pricing. And so one really good example is we talked about number 2 HDPE natural. So that would be your milk jugs that don't have any pigment in them, or your apple cider jug. Those had an astronomical rise in price in recent years. And the reason is basically because there was more demand for this material and there were some supply limitations. That material can be turned into a lot more new products because it has no color. And so you can add whatever pigment you want to it. It's food safe. And so there's really a lot of options for that material. And so we saw that price skyrocket for a period of time. It has come back down, basically because supply and demand changed for that material. So it's sort of like the stock market, prices go up, prices go down. Generally, we do see that prices overall increase over time. And that's in part because, the cost of disposing of trash continues to go up, and it makes recycling more valuable over time financially.
Great, that's really helpful. Another question that we're often asked is recycling environmentally sustainable? So considering all the transportation and hauling involved in the processing, does it actually make sense to recycle? And Reagan, I'm going to send one to you as well.
Yes. So, the overall answer is yes, but of course, the devil's in the details. So, for example, like I said, with aluminum, it is extremely expensive and environmentally destructive to extract, to mine more aluminum ore out of the ground. And so recycling aluminum, even when you're having to transport it and haul it somewhere, it's really beneficial environmentally. Another thing I think is important to keep in mind is if you're not recycling something, then you're throwing it away. And if you're throwing it away, you're still going to have transportation and hauling involved. So it's not like you don't already have that, those greenhouse gas emissions with trash. It's still going to happen. You have to haul the material, whether it's being recycled or whether it's being thrown away. I will say with certain materials, there are limits to when something is, beneficial to haul it a long distance, for example. So glass is very heavy. And so that means it's actually quite expensive to transport it longer distances, if you're doing that by truck, for example. And so, if you're transporting glass over a long distance to recycle it, that's going to reduce the environmental value of recycling it. But typically sort of the financial markets work that out because you want to find a place to recycle it nearby because it's going to be less expensive to haul it a shorter distance. At NRRA, a big part of what we do is helping communities actually get their recyclable material to the end market that's then going to use it and turn it into something new. And while we work throughout New England, we're always looking to take something, to the shortest distance possible because that's more financially valuable and it's more environmentally responsible.
No, that's really helpful. So we have just a few minutes left. So I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball for you three. And I'm going to ask that everyone answer this. So if there was one thing that you would love people to know about recycling, what would it be? I'll let anyone start first.
I like to tell people that whether you care about the environment or you care about taxpayer dollars, recycling is a benefit to both. It's both environmentally responsible and it can help your community save money by reducing your costs of disposal. So either way, it's a win-win.
That's great.
One thing I think people don't realize as well is when we were talking about markets, we're hauling from New England as far as Michigan with plastics, as far as Pennsylvania, but it's done on a backhaul. The truck is coming to New England with other commodity and it's going back to that location with our recyclables on it. So that helps a little bit in, the palatability of trucking from point A to point B.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it helps your community. It keeps the community clean. It's a great spot for people to meet and greet. There's too many things that are good about it to zero in on one thing, in my opinion.
No, that's excellent. I guess I'm going to add my own 2 cents. If you happen to live in a town that has source separated recycling, which is much of, but not all of New Hampshire, you have a really special thing right at your door. Sort of what Josh was alluding to. It's a great place to see friends and neighbors. You can visit the swap shop, and it's a really special and unique thing that I even bring people to our recycling center and to our transfer station to show it off, because it's really neat to see, physically see both your solid waste and the amount of recycling that your town can put together. And I always just imagine how much better it would be if an even greater percentage of residents chose to recycle even just a little bit.
Absolutely.
So we're going to end with some giant questions to make it real light. So for everyone, what's the future of recycling in the Northeast? Who would like to go first?
So what I think when we kind of look big picture at this question, I think about the fact that in the Northeast, and particularly in New England, recycling will become more and more important. And that's in part because, as I mentioned, the cost of throwing away our trash is going to get more and more expensive. And I think that one thing that many people may not realize is that what we pay to dispose of trash here in New England and in the Northeast is much higher than what typically the rest of the country is paying. We pay far more money to dispose of trash here. And that's in part because we have less available space. We're a really populated region. We have a lot of groundwater, which means there's just less suitable places to dig a huge pit to put trash. And so as we pay more money to dispose of trash, it will become more and more beneficial to be recycling in the future.
I see it as very exciting. Having done this back in the day when standing on a landfill and just watching everything go over the side and get covered up with dirt, that we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go. And I think we alluded to it a little bit in that we need to have some producer responsibility. We need to know that that container is going to have the proper instructions on it and that we'll be able to recycle it down the way. So a lot of communication needs to happen in between amongst all of the entities and get that, what we call cradle to grave, making sure that that piece of whatever we pick up in the grocery store is going to actually get recycled into something else or that same product. So we've got work to do, but I'm encouraged by the future.
Yeah, I agree with Bonnie and Reagan. I think that it's going to become more and more important regardless of the financial aspect on it. But when new materials, packaging, commodities come out, that they're going to have to eventually lead themselves into an easier way to be recycled, reused, to avoid being landfilled. So I don't think financially it's going to be the biggest impact. I think it's going to be caring about the environment and the land that's going to really push people to conserve what we have in New Hampshire and keep it good. So
Great. Well, thank you three again so much for joining us today, for being our recycling experts. I know that folks might have additional questions as they leave this event. I want to let people know that you can always ask. You can either email us, or as I said, you can find us on social media, NRRA on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. And otherwise, thank you all so much for attending this final Ask Me Anything event of the Recycle Right campaign. It's my hope that we will continue to do these into the future, even once the campaign is over. And also be sure to check out the campaign on the NRRA website at nrrarecycles.org/recycle-right. That's it, folks. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good one.
you.
Bye.